And that's okay. I support that. But throwing a punch is different from engaging in interventionism, engaging in a miscalculation and thinking that we can take on this system as such a premature developed political stage. So George saying that electoral processes must have broken down. The confidence of the electorate in any of the old forms completely shattered. Confidence in the ability of the old system to honestly organize any aspect of public life must be shaken to the core. Years and years ago, it may have been an acceptable tactic to organize a people's ticket. Catch that, brothers and sisters. Years and years ago, it may have been acceptable to organize a people's ticket. You got groups out there organizing people's tickets right now of solid worker and revolutionary credentials and arm it with an ideal platform, only to be defeated by a mud-slinging opportunist warlord, demonstrably inferior, scum-swilling pig. Then pass out a pamphlet to explain to the people how the system has failed us, Bernie Sanders. Or speak it in Pershing Square of New York, or years ago in the Campus Hall, Washington, D.C. Today, it is not a tactic. It is counter-revolution. Counter-revolution. After 40 years, it's pretty clear that it would not suffice. Years ago, working with and attempting to influence union leadership may have been judicious. But the government has long since infiltrated and brought off this leadership and legislated a way to strike. Union hall speeches and pamphlet passing are playing that revolution, brothers and sisters. Playing that revolution. It isn't revolutionary or materialist to disconnect things, to disconnect revolutionary consciousness from revolutionizing activity, to build consciousness with political agitation and educational issue making alone is idealistic rather than materialist. Let me read that back one more time. And I know we have in our UPM manual a section on historical dialectical materialism. So I would encourage comrades to go back and read that. This is what George talking about here. He's breaking it down pretty simple, though. It isn't revolutionary or materialist to disconnect things, to disconnect revolutionary consciousness from revolutionary activity, to build consciousness with political agitation and educational issue making alone is idealistic rather than materialist. The effect has been reformism rather than revolution. When any election is held, it will fortify rather than destroy the credibility of the power brokers. When we participate in this election to win instead of disrupt, we're lending to its credibility and destroying our own. All power to the people. With all the factors of control over the electoral process in the hands of the minority ruling class, the People's Party can always be made to seem isolated, unimportant, even extraneous. They got crazy ideas. Y'all know how they do the Green Party. They don't even let the Green Party get on Democratic tickets without challenging them in courts all across this country. The Democratic Party I'm talking about, and any other party for that matter, if these tactics still give the appearance of revolution to some after decades of miscarriage, we are justified in replacing them as vanguard. When people begin to express their disgust at the demagogic and reformist maneuvers of the vanguard parties, and he's talking about so-called revolutionary organizations, brothers and sisters, they will discover in real action a new form of political activity which in no way resembles the old. Catch that. When people begin to express their disgust at the demagogic reformist maneuvers of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and all these fake socialist parties, they will discover in real action a new form of political activity, which in no way resembles the old. These here, brothers and sisters and comrades, are the politics of leaders and organizers living inside history, who take the lead with their brains and their muscles in the fight for freedom. These politics are revolutionary and social. And these new facts, which the native will now come to know exist only in action, not words. They are the essence of the fight which explodes the old colonial truths and reveals unexpected facets, which bring out new meanings and pinpoints the contradictions camouflaged by these facts. The people, brothers and sisters, engaged in struggle, who because of it command and know these facts, go forward, free from colonialism and forewarned of all attempts at mystification, inoculated against all national anthems. Violence alone, violence committed by the people, violence organized and educated by its leaders, makes it possible for the masses to understand social truths and gives the key to them. Without that struggle, without that knowledge of the practice of action, there's nothing but a fancy dress parade and the blare of trumpets. There's nothing save a minimum of readaction, a few reforms at the top, a flag waving, but down at the bottom, an undivided mass, still living in the Middle Ages, endlessly marking time. If a comrade can tell me what quote that is, I will personally send them a new African Black Panther Party button, Rainbow Coalition button, and a New Era Young Lords button. What quote was that I just said? We have no one who would take that on? All power to the people. So that is...
I'll take it on, but you don't have to send me that. And the reason why I'll take it on is because it's in the book. It says it where it's from. You don't have to send me anything though, but it's Frantz Fanon.
All power to the people, brothers and sisters. And we want to make sure that we get Frantz Fanon. I think we have that in our book collection. Get Frantz Fanon out there so the comrades can read Frantz Fanon, who we think is one of the great thinkers, anti-colonial thinkers of the 20th century. A man who left Martinique that was oppressed and exploited by France, became a doctor, and because of his consciousness working in Algeria, where France was in control of that country, he saw the brutal, naked reality of colonialism up front. And because of his consciousness, he abandoned his doctoral and joined the Algerian freedom fighters, which eventually led to the freedom of Algeria in 1961. So I'm talking about a heavy dude, comrade, who died at 30 years old. He got 6 or 7 books out there. He died from cancer. In fact, he didn't even see Algeria become free because he died, I think, 1960, and Algeria became free in 1961. You know, this is a bad, bad brother right here. So I would advise comrades to look up Frantz Fanon, Direction of the Earth. In general, retreat to avoid full commitment to right the discomfort out of revolution. Some have raised a debate among us that has degenerated into name calling, quoting the same authorities to validate diametrically opposed ideas, and ultimately creating a process that is dividing us into 2 mutually exclusive or contradictory groups. The overall effect is to reduce us to caricature. Brothers and sisters, when more than one individual is involved in any life situation, the fact of subjectivism will always make differences based on opinion and interpretation. A problem in exchanges and reaching the necessary means for the initiation of collective activity. This is some profound shit here, brothers, because a lot of groups who don't understand that subjectivism play a role in the revolutionary process end up name calling and fighting each other, and the group break up because they don't have a dialectical materialist understanding of how the collective process works. So listen what George said, when one or more individuals is involved in any situation, the fact of their emotions, the fact of their perspective, how they see the world, will always make a difference based on opinion and interpretation. A problem in exchanges and reaching the necessary means for the initiation of collective activity. Some debate will always be carried on. However, on the basics, we must somehow agree or nothing will get done. All opinions, comrades, are not of equal value, and there is such a thing as counterproductive revisionism. Stupidity is not unknown to our long-range political enemies. Participation in electoral politics organized by the enemy state after recognizing that the whole process must be discredited as a conditional step into revolution, and particularly participation that tends to authenticate this process is the opposite of revolution. It is a tactic for the ultra-rightists. With history as our guide, brothers and sisters, we can never make such monumental errors. The history of the United States, the blood-soaked, urine-steeped essence of its being, the wreckage and demise of its human character under the wheels of a 200-year headlong flight with headless, frightened animals at the controls of a machine that has mastered them, allows for no appeal on a strictly ideological level. George Wallace or Adolf Hitler will fare better at the polls of an honest election than Huey Newton or Tom Hayden. But again, comrades, brothers and sisters, what is an honest election? After the fact of monopoly capital. So, comrades, repression is indeed a part of revolution, a natural aspect of antithesis, the always to be expected defense attack reflex of the beleaguered toothless tiger. All arguments against this fundamental fact are false and labored to the point of being completely illogical. Can power be seriously challenged without a response? Will Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, the robber barons of today, the tycoons of today, will Donald Trump, will Boris Johnson, will Macron of France, and this little fake little liberal that was just elected in Germany, will they allow us to simply seize their privilege without resistance? Can we steal it away from the greatest bandit of all time with sleight of hand, with magic alone? Incredible. The fascists understand the value of mass psychology, are familiar with its use, and hold all the important implements of its effective control. But they are not aware of our existence and our general strategy regarding the reaching of the people. Comrades, brothers and sisters, the whole situation can be reduced to a minority ruling clique, engaging the people's vanguard elements for control of the masses. The ruling clique approaches its task with the, quote, what to think program. The vanguard elements have the much more difficult job of promoting, quote, how to think. Comrades, no tactic can be ignored or discounted in such a battle. Power responds to all threats. The response is repression. If the threat is a small one, the fascist tactic is to laugh you off, ignore you, isolated with this defense mechanism, quote, media. Remember Malcolm said, the enemy have the ability to make the criminal look like the victim and the victim look like the criminal. They are masters of using the media. And this is what George is saying here. If you're not too big of a threat, they'll write you down in the New York Times, the Washington Post as a despicable person, a criminal, a caricature, and hope that the masses believe that stuff. You know, you're not too big of a threat to them. That's how they'll use their media to isolate and destroy the integrity of the organization. So the greater the threat, the greater the corresponding balance from the enemy power. The only effective challenge to power is one that is broad enough to make isolation impossible and intensive enough to cause repression to affect the normal lifestyle of as many members of the society as possible. By compromising, playing that class war, we lose. If some effective means, comrades, of threatening to wield power is not used in the opening stages of revolutionary activity, repression will concentrate itself on vanguard elements. Remember they dropped the bombs on Move, 1985? They were concentrated on Osage Avenue. That's where their effective power was at. And so the enemy was able to concentrate its resources there and drop the bomb, killing men, women, and children. So George is talking some real stuff here. Repression will concentrate itself on the vanguard elements alone. On the vanguard elements only. When the ideal situation is for the people to feel the raw essence of power. Nothing can bend consciousness more effectively than a false arrest, a no-knock evasion, careless, panic-stricken gunfire from the pig. These will frighten some, anger others. Common sense alone tells me who the people will turn their anger against. Perhaps for a short time, they may curse the new African Black Panther Party out. But since the pig is a pig, it won't be long before the anger is channeled in the right direction. So, brothers, revolution builds in stages. It isn't cool or romantic. It's bold and vicious. It's stalking and being stalked. The opposition rising above our level of balance to repress us. And our forces learning how to counter this repression and again pulling ourselves above their level of balance. Think of our great brothers and sisters in Palestine, locked into that open air prison. I forget his name. I'm sure a comrade would tell me, where Hamas is the administrators. These cats are not necessarily communists, although they have a democratic centralist structure to their organization, but these cats know how to fight. They know how to organize the people. Gaza, I'm talking about Gaza, brothers and sisters, all power to the people, Gaza. These Hamas know how to fight. They know how to bring the masses into the struggle. They know how to keep the issues of the day on the minds of the people so they can never be deterred or distracted by the glitz and glamour of the neo-colonialist PLO. So they are constantly learning new ways to overcome the Israeli state balance. This is Gaza, 1.2 million people fighting by itself, essentially, against the Israeli state, a nuclear-armed state. The PLO, Ramallah ain't helping them. That's where this little punk sits at right now, the leader of the PLO. They're not helping those cats in Gaza. They give lip service. You know, Hamas had to fight them in the streets in order that they can administrate as legitimate elected leaders of Gaza. Catch that. They didn't come to power through a dictatorship like they did in Ukraine. Zelensky was stalled in power in 2014. Hamas was elected to power by the people of Gaza. And guess what the United States did? We're not going to recognize you. So what? The elections was legitimate. The whole world said they were legitimate elections. United Nations, everybody. But they said we're going to withdraw our aid to Hamas. So Hamas, just like Hezbollah to the south, they have learned through hard stages of a warrior organization how to rise above the terror of the enemy state. Because the enemy state they would kill. You see what they did to the journalist sister? Shot the sister down. She was in a corner with her camera out, taking pictures. Her cameraman was in front of her. In fact, 2 other people was in front of that sister, Shirley. She was in the back with a bulletproof vest on that clearly marked press on it. The whole world could see. But she was in a thorn in the side of the Zionist state for years. Legitimate political journalist. She told the story of the suffering Palestinian people. And Israel took an opportunity to shoot her down. Why not? Why not? The United States is shooting down other people around the world. They got a war going on right there in Europe, Eastern Europe. Israel want to flex its muscles. And so some of these other oppressive, tyrannical regimes who are saying, yes, we want to be just like Zelensky in Ukraine. We got minorities that are terrorists in our country. This is what they're saying. And they're mowing down Bedouins. Look what they just did to the brothers and sisters in the deserts of the Palestinian brothers and sisters in the deserts situated next to Morocco. Those brothers and sisters have an independent state. They were colonized. They fought to be free. Trump came in and said, all of this land belongs to Morocco. So the Palestinians, the Bedouin people have lost their self-determination after fighting 40, 50 years. And they sat at the table with the United Nations, with the United States, and with that punk Hassan, who was the leader of Morocco at the time. And they said, we're going to give you autonomy. We're not going to give you self-determination. Until a few years from now, we're going to have a vote and see what the people of that area want. And they lied. They lied. And the Palestinian brothers and sisters now are engaged in an armed struggle in the desert, deserts, fighting the Moroccan enemy state. So I'm talking some real shit here. I apologize for getting a little emotional, but, you know, we have to see this is a real struggle. This is a real struggle. That process repeats itself again and again until finally the level is reached where the real power of the people is felt and the ruling class is suppressed. The power of the people lies in its greater potential violence. And this power of the people, that greater potential violence, can be brought to fruition only if the conditions in an urban society are created by the application of the Foucault theory. Now, we talked about the Foucault theory last class, and how that was a pretty bad military idea, and how we saw it as left adventurism and not conducive to people's protracted struggle. You know, I'm not going to go into that again. I'm sure the chairman has it recorded. Somebody want to listen to that conversation. The focal theory can be effective only when it does not allow itself to be isolated from the people, thus exposing itself to the vastly superior firepower of the corporate state. So, brothers and sisters, I apologize for this. I was meaning to go an hour today because I have a housing meeting coming up. But what I could do is, and I apologize, brothers and sisters, I had to. I could turn the meeting over to Comrade. You still here, Jake?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so we have essentially 5 minutes left, and I apologize, but I got to jump on this call for the housing strike we're about to have here in the city. And can you, if you want to just sum it up with Tom and all the other comrades, and I apologize, but I'll see y'all comrades Saturday.
All right, yeah, I can do that. I'll do a brief summary, and then I'll open this up for about 5 or 10 minutes for discussion on the material. Oh, but I'll leave after that. So,
all right. Well, thank you, brothers and sisters. I apologize again. You know, it's the helter skelter time. It's a good time to be an organizer. So I got to run to this meeting right quick, and I'll see you, comrades, Saturday. All power to the people. Thank you, Chairman Jake, for allowing me to teach this class. All power to the people.
All power. All right. So, just briefly, some of the main points here that were made in this book, section 20 through 30. I think one of the most pertinent points that was made was the denunciation of the tactic of reformism. More so, the tactic of using the election as a means of radicalizing the masses, as a means of spreading class consciousness. So what would happen in, prior to this book, 40 years prior to the writing of this book or so, and a little bit further before that, most of the communist and socialist organizations in the U.S. actually advocated for some form of an elective strategy. And this, they would have a national body, and they would, all vote to pick who would be their candidate for, the 1920 election, whatever it was, right? And this is the time of the time period where you see people like Eugene Debs, coming on the political scene, running, and it was in the sense of they did this to make a statement, really. To the masses of people, right? Like Eugene Debs running from a jail cell, right? Like this is a political statement, right? This figure has been oppressed radically. He's a radical socialist. Look at all the 1.4 million voters, and now he's running from a jail cell. Look what this has done to him based on his use of his First Amendment rights. And so this was meant to alienate people from the political system. The hopes was that this would build up your revolutionary forces. In doing so, setting up these campaigns, you would build organizational infrastructure that could be used later on. And then, later on down the line, when the conditions are right, we can then go forward with the revolution. It also talks about the denunciation of a as a revolutionary tactic. This is the focus strictly on trade unions or industrial unions. Industrial unionizing is when you try to get the general workforce all under one big umbrella union, so that you can then do general strikes, which would shut down the economy, withhold labor power from capitalists, which would affect their profits. And we saw it time and time again where this tactic was used on smaller scales never on the national scale where every worker stopped working on the same day or whatever. Usually it was on the local scale. But whenever it was implemented successfully, the National Guard would crack down on it. It would, they'd completely break up that movement. They would jail the organizers. They would beat the kids of, strikers. They would kill people. They would employ private detective agencies. And there's a long history of this, stretching all the way back into the 1800s as a strategy. But the electoral strategy was mainly a 20th century, or early 20th century tactic. So what George is doing here is he's saying, look at this, look at what we see here. It's not conducive for revolution. This is a play tactic. It's, these people aren't serious. These people who are advocating this. We have long since passed not only testing this as an experiment for revolution, right, as a tactic, but we're the necessity of more intense revolutionary tactics. We have to go beyond this. We have to have something that's more militant, something that's more directly conducive to building dual power. So there's that section. And he also talks about, before that, he talks about the need for us to ourselves from the current economic base of society, specifically in the Black community, because for so long they have been submissive to such a system in one form or another. And oftentimes get the brunt end of the repression when it comes to that. So even if they did get a piece of the pie, as it was stated in the book, it would be a menial existence. They would still be exploited en masse, and this time by themselves. So he advocates for the strategy of distancing ourselves as revolutionaries from the capitalist system. That's really not controversial. The more controversial thing, at least in our day, is the distancing from electoralism and from economism as tactics. And then, of course, we wrap up with the third major point here with the people's liberation, not just here but abroad. And obviously, the distancing ourselves from the Foucault theory. So that's like the main points here of this text that we have read. But I'm going to open the floor now. We got about 5 or 10 minutes before. So if you want to speak, the floor is open.
Well, one thing, I'm sorry.
Okay, can you hear me? I'll speak quickly if you can hear me. I don't know if you can hear me. I have to get my headphones on.
I was muted. Sorry. We're gonna let Rob speak, and then we're gonna have Tom.
Okay, I'll be real quick. I hate to cut Tom off. Yeah, I wanted to add in, and I think that when we're talking about reformism, revisionism, and different aspects of what we're going to be dealing with other, I would say, Communist Party or left-wing organizations that we're going to have some ideological struggles on this. And I think that one of the big things we consider is that we're in the imperial core. We have a lot of concessions that flood us in a way that we're subjected to a lot of individualism. We're subjected to a lot of liberalism in a way that someone doesn't want to give up their comfortability in the name of the struggle. And that's why we have a lot of struggles even within the proletariat itself. Like, for example, the labor aristocracy and the petite bourgeois, and that we necessarily need them to be on our side. And it's something that they have to understand, that they have to reject some of these concessions, their high way of living, their Starbucks macchiatos and stuff like that, and really put themselves in the line of fire with the rest of the class. And that's one of the things that we're going to have our own battles amongst our own working class that we're going to have to deal with. And in the communist parties, I know that Lenin dealt with it with different people within the party that were trying to push for, reforms and concessions to union workers and stuff like that, and trying to use a little bit of labor power in a way to get some things done here and there. But at the end of the day, it wasn't in favor of seizing power, and it was more harmful to the movement in general. And I think that's one of the major things we get into. You're going to be somebody that you might be organizing with that's going to turn around and say, like, no, I can't do this because my boss is going to be mad at me. And that's the importance of, as well as having the survival program, because there's going to be a time where it's going to come between your fancy job and having to go do something for the people. And And if you have a problem with picking a side on that, then that's not revolutionary at all, and that you have to do a lot more studying. And we're not going to get things done when we keep having to have to fight with opportunists and liberalism all the time. But I just wanted to chime in on that real quick. All power to the people.
Just to elaborate briefly on what you just said there, these two tactics, reformism and economism, these are tactics that are widespread, adopted by organizations, everybody from DSA on the ultra-right deviation to CPUSA. And it makes me wonder, have this book in particular, right? And not just this one, but many other ones that have from a long line of leftists, mostly from the 60s onward, in the U.S., in the Imperial Core, who critiqued this strategy that they are adopting in this current day. And that's not to say that we can't work with these people on programmatic things, right? Where our goals align, that we can't work with them, right, to further the cause. But it just makes me wonder, how could this happen? How could the state of the left get into this position that it's in? Given the swath of critiques, not just from people who have these things today, but from across time. And just one more thing, I will say, as far as the electoral strategy and the economist strategy, I think these things are very they're counter-revolutionary in the sense that it's convenient to these particular organizations who adopted these strategies, because right, when you cast a ballot, you feel like you've done something, right? When you're speaking with your coworkers about these are the conditions, and you meet up with your union rep, you feel like you've done something, right? And to shape these ideas, to give the character that, oh, these things are revolutionary, right? And this is our program, right? It takes away so much energy that could be put toward things that have been proven to work, specifically with the tactics involved with community organizing. And then the failure to, denounce the electoral strategy on the one hand, right? And then the failure to do the rigorous community organizing it takes to actually have dual power, right? Alongside working with unions and trying to flip them back into revolutionary organizations. I mean, there's a detachment between these two things, or these three things. And so when, George Jackson says, it's not revolutionary to take things in isolation, right? To disconnect them, right? I think this is one of the problems that many of the biggest organizations in the country today have. So I just wanted to put that up. But Tom, and then we have Alan.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, this was written in 1971. In 1973, Bobby Seale ran for mayor of Oakland on the Democratic ticket and not only pulled everybody off of the people survival programs to work on his campaign, but they shut down chapters all around the country to pull organizers to Oakland to work on his campaign. And they did score a lot of votes, but the effect on the party was disastrous. And Bobby himself quit the party, not long after he lost the election. It really fed into the illusion that we can work within the Democratic Party, that we can work within the system, and affect radical change. It was one of the biggest mistakes the Black Panther Party made. We saw in this last election that a lot of the energy that had been built by the Black Lives Matter struggle was siphoned into working for Biden and getting the Democrats elected, and we see that it had a tremendously deleterious effect on the struggle against police repression, which is still rampant in this country. It certainly shut the shit out of the anti-war movement, as we see, the Democrats being the war hogs in the situation in Ukraine, and very little anti-war opposition to it. And it boils down to this lesser evil argument, that revolution is not made by choosing the lesser evil. But revolution is made by consistently working towards the solution. And every time you fall into that lesser evil argument, you're telling the masses that revolution is not the solution. It's not just non-revolutionary, it's counter-revolutionary.
Absolutely. Alan?
I was just going to suggest, I know Rosa Luxemburg in the book Reform or Revolution basically talks about the economic side, what we were discussing today. That the concessions can easily be taken back by the bourgeois power and stuff. And it's I get what you guys are saying, but it's really I don't know, because I live in the South, and it's like I understand what you guys are saying, and yes, we need to build grassroots and work and community style, community style stuff, just in case when we are doing this stuff. But it's the mindset of the people that have to be convinced into that, because especially the myth of black capitalism is like one of the. I know I'm kind of jumping here, but it's like it ties into itself, ties in together. But it's like having to explain the myth of black capitalism doesn't work is very exhausting, and it's like, well, I know you can't vote fascism out, and start trying to explain that one is exhausting as well. And so it's just, I know watching documentaries, when you show people stuff and it works and people then latch on, but at the same time, you have to hope that people's mindset sticks with it. Because just because you get lightning in a bottle once doesn't always mean you can get it twice. Even though it could, but you get what I'm saying? I'm coming from a southern perspective from it. Like working with people, and not necessarily here in Houston, because it's a lot easier in the city than it is like out in the county. Trying to explain these concepts to people out that way because they exist too. Like they're in a sense, they're our form of the peasantry. You know, Lenin said we have to include the peasantry within the revolution as well. You know, try to get them in with the proletariat. You know, not necessarily they'll be the vanguard of it, but like get them in and working. And pretty much is what I'm trying to understand the foundation of Leninism. You know, so I just wanted to say that.
And I'll you know, just to elaborate briefly, you know, as far as the, you know, the difficulty with, you know, speaking on Black capitalism, I mean, you probably don't run into the same trouble that I might run into with that. Whereas, you know, a lot of people in this day, you know, think that I shouldn't speak on the issues in another community, and you know, I think they're half right. You know, so when I run into this trouble, it's usually an argument like, well, who are you to speak on behalf of Black people? When you run into the argument, you probably hit the problems more directly. You know, people who, you know, you're saying, you know, we have to be able to limit we have to be able to liberate ourselves, you know, economically. We have to be able to be on the compete level of, you know, white capitalists, and we have to be able to build, you know, economics within our communities and uplift the ghettos and all these different things. And, you know, I think that really, as far as electoralism goes in this argument, I think it's best, like, as you say, you have to meet them where they're at. I think the best way to meet them where they're at is to acknowledge the fact that they're already engaging in aspects of socialism. They're already engaging in spontaneous acts of solidarity with each other. You know, it could be anything from, you know, somebody's got a fundraise for, you know, somebody with a disability. They need some kind of access to, maybe they need a new prosthetic leg or something like that. You see what I'm saying? It's so people come together in the community, and this happens all the time, even in poor communities. But these are acts that, you know, they're most of the time hyper individualist acts, because it's targeted towards one person. It's almost like mutual aid, but it's not quite that. But it involves a collective. Right, a collective effort. And this is what I mean by engaging in aspects of socialism. So a lot of people will see that there's a problem in their community, and then they'll work toward remedying that problem directly, right? They didn't vote to do that. Somebody said, okay, hey, I see this problem. I'm going to start organizing towards solving it, right? And so you can start small with the things that, you know, you can tackle, you know, in your community more readily, but while just taking the individualist aspect out and serving a collective by a collective. You see what I'm saying? Then it's more, it's a lot closer to what we're trying to build. But it starts small. And so if you see the establishment system, the electoral strategy as, you know, the only real mechanism change in a community, you're missing something here. In the same way that people see that as the only mechanism for change, they're oftentimes forgetting that there are other mechanisms, and they oftentimes are engaging in those mechanisms. So it's about finding, you know, a way to bridge that, like, cognitive dissonance there, because you say, okay, well, we gotta fix these streets, right? Or, you know, we gotta fix our water or something like that, right? Well, the first thing everybody starts screaming about is voting, right? Okay, well, what are all the examples of times where communities directly solve those problems, right? When did they start putting in rain catches? When did they, you know, source their water from a different location? When did they, you know, go out and directly start fixing the roads, right? And you can show people that there are examples of this, right? And you can say, hey, this is not much different than when, you know, the apartment complex, you know, pitched in $20, so, you know, the old lady down the hall could, you know, get some more oxygen for her oxygen tanks. So it's really about finding ways to capture this other kind of action. And the people recognize this. They know that this kind of thing exists. They just keep forgetting it it's conditioned them by the system too. They are propagandized all their lives toward believing that this is the only way that they can solve their problems. when in reality, they know better. So it's about trying to find that. Now, wherever you want to start is up to you, right? And what capacity you have to solve that problem, right? How many people you have, what resources you have access to. That's a limiting factor. So you need to try to find people and try to grow an organization organically in its grassroots, but it's usually going to be people who are rallied around a particular problem. So if it's all the drinking water is fucked up and all they can talk about is voting, well, anybody who's handing out bottled water in the face of that problem is a potential person for you to organize with. You see what I'm saying? It's just about finding those people and those issues. But I agree with you on the black capitalism problem, and it's like that in the white community too. I mean, we're not trying to build financial power in this way, but a lot of people believe that if only the right people could have access to capital, we could solve so many of the world's problems, and it's just not the case. Tom?
Small capitalists that, like, for example, we used to go around to the bakeries and talk to the owners and get them to give us their day-old bread and their day-old, donuts and muffins and stuff that they would normally throw in the dumpster that we could give out to the people for free. Same with the greengrocers would give us, vegetables that had been, out for a few days, and they were, going to replace it with fresh stuff instead of throwing it away, giving it to us to make soup out of or whatever. There's a lot of small business people that are sympathetic. As long as it's not really costing them anything, in fact, we had a May Day one day in a place downtown called Reefer Park. It's down in the ghetto where, people sell reefer. And there's a little mom and pop store right on the corner there that somebody, turned a garage into a little store. And the people there, like immigrants that, speak very little English. And so we're holding our May Day there, and we were in the store buying, or something, and the guy sees our buttons, and he brings out a picture of Che Guevara, and to show that, he loves Che. And then we explained to him what we're doing in the park and, the International Workers' Day. And him and his family came out and they're handing out candy and food to the people at the May Day demonstration, which is, these are people that they're, like the poorest of the small capitalists, but, have, identity and solidarity with the working class and with the struggle of the working class. So I don't think we have to support black capitalism to make those kind of alliances, because even for the black capitalists, it's a losing game. 90% of the small businesses go out of business within a year. It's not a workable solution. And if your business is successful, then the bigger capitalists are going to cut your throat and, steal your business away from you, with their greater capital anyway. They're experienced enough to know how to take over anything that's profitable. But the aspirations that the people have for the community can be tapped and worked with, and we can bring these people with their skills into creating, socialist co-ops that need people that know how to do management and how to, balance books and things like that. I think as long as the important thing is not to be an opportunist, but to stay on point and win people to our program rather than try to hustle anybody. You know, as soon as it's like when how long does your marriage last after you start lying to your spouse? It doesn't, you know, because once they realize you've lied to them, they're never going to trust you again. And the same is true for the masses and revolutionaries. When we start lying to people and trying to hustle them into, you know, some kind of thing that we want to, you know, we don't be honest about, we're going to lose that support. And, you know, that's how a lot of these parties that have become opportunists have buried themselves. You know, they lied to the workers, they lied to different sections of the people, and, you know, they're no longer taken as credible.
Just to elaborate on sorry about that. Just to elaborate on what Tom said, you know, one of the so I had a conversation with a far right militia leader one time. We opened up a discourse to see, you know, it was partly an experiment of mine just to see, you know, how far can I get somebody who's obviously already far gone. How far can I bring them over to my side? You know, and so, you know, it started with, you know, the whole, what's fundamental truth, right? Okay, well, with him, you know, and me, we could both agree that we're both human, right? And then we just go from there, right? We get to the point where we're both agreeing we're in the same class, right? And he agrees with my understanding of class, right? With Marx, right? And so we go, you know, we go on, and I get to the point where we start talking about Mao and these kinds of people. And, you know, I get him to agree with things with, you know, the military doctrine of Mao, the protracted People's War as a strategy. He absolutely thinks that's an excellent strategy, right? Well, you know, we start getting a little bit deeper on class, and, you know, he doesn't see, he's a class collaborationist, right? So he doesn't see a necessity for a class war. He thinks that capitalism actually brings all these different wonderful things to our society, and, you know, it's not a contributor to many of the social ills. He thinks that many of those social ills are a result of individual traits and behaviors and motion through society. And, you know, we're at this huge point of disagreement. And so I break down to him exactly how are workers exploited, right? Because he believes that, you know, a capitalist invested all this time and money and all these things, and so they're entitled to some fruit of that, right? Well, you know, I explained to him that even if you believe that, right, like Tom said, 90% of these businesses fail, right? 90% of startups fail. If you believe that, you know, why don't you believe that those people are entitled for, you know, compensation under such a, you know, a cutthroat market and all these different things? And, you know, we start getting to the point where we're talking about, you know, macroeconomics, right? What is the government's role in this? And, you know, he thinks that, you know, the government is paid for by corporations, right? This is almost a libertarian Marxist view or a socialist view.
That's a hard thing. But you didn't have to go nowhere.
Also believing that, that free market capitalism is the only game in town, right? And so I asked him the question, right? And he admits to me that he can't answer this question because he isn't educated enough, and I have to give him that, right? If he doesn't understand the topic, I don't know how we continue the argument, and I can't teach it to him because he doesn't have the skills for that. But basically, it came down to an argument between laissez-faire capitalism and Keynesian economics, right? So do we want a completely free market or do we want a regulated market, right? And he obviously is in favor of the laissez-faire capitalist system. Okay, well, what do you get in the end? You get monopolies and they control the government, right? He agrees. Well, what do you get in the end of of a Keynesian system where you have regulation, right? You still get monopolies, it just takes longer, right? They get into the government, they still lobby to get all these different politicians in, former CEOs become politicians, they still get into the intelligence agencies, they still topple countries all over the world, and then they change all those laws and deregulate the economy again, right? So you're at an impasse, and it's at this point where he starts to say, well, I don't really understand either of these concepts enough to carry the conversation forward. Now, you might run into people who actually concepts, right? And if you're talking to somebody who supports capitalism, whether it's black capitalism or just capitalism broadly, this might be an avenue for you to approach them. Sometimes you'll encounter who, supports black capitalism. This is hard pressed to find this person, but they may not even agree with you that two people who have a skin color are both human. Now that's like, you're probably not going to find that person, but we differ on some biological concept called race, right? As if there's a concrete thing. But you can still get to the point where you're talking about, where capitalism breaks down. Where's the problem? How does exploitation work? What exactly is going on in the workplace, right? It's those conversations that you have to have with these people. And you just have to temper yourself in engaging with the hyper-individualist argument of, oh, this person's entitled to somebody else's labor value. How you approach that is on you. It depends on the particular person you're talking to. But these are the kinds of conversations you might want to have. More almost scientific conversations as opposed to rhetorical ones or things like that. That's just what I would offer. But I'm gonna give the floor to Rob, and then we're gonna have Dean, and then we're gonna have to close out.
All right, just real quick, I wanted to say a few things. Yeah, I don't know, whatever capitalism, wherever it comes from, it doesn't matter. It's an oppressive system. There's nothing liberating about it. But something that Tom said, he brought up about Bobby Seale. I'm not really trying to completely defend what was going on with Bobby Seale back then, but from a historical standpoint, the Panthers were taking a lot of hits, and he was put under pressure by, I know coming out of the National Black Political Convention 40 years ago that happened in Gary, Indiana, where all the different black organizations came together and were trying to come up with a consensus of what to do with the community and so on and so forth. And the 40-year anniversary that just happened, looking back on it, everyone is asking all right, we basically took a route of reformism versus revolution, and what did reformists get us? And it got us nowhere. And that's something that I wanted to bring into light. Yeah, and Bobby Seale, I think he was pressured by the community on a national level to try to take that route in a sense. And the movement was on one of their last legs at that point. So they did. I do know they got 40% of the vote, but I don't advocate for electoral politics at all, though. But I just wanted to add in real quick.
Dean? Oh, you're muted. Hold on. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So I was wondering, I'm in an interracial family, like my girlfriend and my son are black. So I was raised around black folks. So it's really nothing to me. I don't see skin color at all. I don't care if you're purple, whatever. I'm going into Dollar General yesterday to go run errands for my girlfriend. She works from home, I work at night. So during the day I take care of my son and I run errands if she needs it. So I'm going into the Dollar General and I see a black couple selling metaphysical jewelry, like hand wrapped metal, like real good quality, like labradorite, rose quartz, citrine, all the good stuff. Okay, all the good stuff. It was all wrapped up, and positively charged for their community. And a person like me, you don't have to say it's for my community. When you say it's for my community, I understand usually most of the time that means your race or your people or whatever. for the most part. I mean, some people are like, when they say my community, like it's just a community, like an all-inclusive community. But I didn't know that I was dealing with separatists at this point. But I was like, wow, those are some really nice jewelry, you know. Like I planned on buying one for my girlfriend right then and there. I was gonna buy her one, and I was like, yeah, how much? And they were like, oh, sorry about this, man, but this is only for our people. And I was like, oh, no big deal. You know, I knew exactly what he meant, but I wanted to see if he was going to tell me that, but he didn't. So I went back inside, and I came back out, and I was like, hey, like I'm not trying to sway him to sell me one because I don't want you to sell me one anymore. But I was actually not purchasing this for myself. I was going to purchase this for her. And I showed them a picture of me and my interracial family, and he was like, oh, okay. He's like, well, I can't really sell nothing. You can follow our Instagram or whatever. And I wanted to actually bring in the conversation about, like, I totally understand why Black folks want to be separated and why other races would want to be separated. But what I wanted to say to them is, like, what's even more befitting, what's even more better spiritually and, like, physically for community growth is understanding why y'all are segregated and understanding why you don't want to be segregated and understanding how to unite. And so, yeah, I ended up not buying them the jewelry from them, but I didn't know what to say. I was actually going to message the group, you know, a couple days ago about this situation, but yeah, man, there's definitely a separation still on both sides, I feel like.
Yeah, I gotcha. It's not conducive to the ideological line that we have. I mean, it's a lot of things. It's counter-revolutionary, you know. It's not based in science either. And the closest thing that you have to race in biology is something called genes. And that just has to do with where genes are originally, where they originally mutated at geographically. And, you know, if you go by genes, then the same genes that code for, you know, like sickle cell anemia or, you know, other things, they're found across what we consider to be racial groups. I mean, race is really just it's a vestige left over from the feudal era with the Roman Empire and other empires. I mean, they would classify, and this was just a means of control and other strategies. It's a means of maintaining the slave class within society. You know, one empire would say, you know, anybody who isn't Roman is a barbarian, or they would break it down even further and say, hey, these people to the north of us they're the Gaul, they're different than us, or you know, these are the Canaanites, or you know, and anybody who wasn't a Roman and would be conquered by Rome in a military conflict, they were subject to potential slavery. So this was a means of, you know, bolstering their slave class. And so what race used to be was more of a national identity. And then it had nothing to do with your skin color. They didn't really care about that. They had to do with where you were from. And then later on in, you know, like the 1800s, when the bourgeois revolutions were taking place, and even a little bit before that, race started to be something else. And it included aspects of national identity, but the main thing that it was focused on was scientific classification. There were a whole bunch of biologists who attempted to divide humans into subcategories. This is where the concept of being subhuman comes from. But you had a huge debate in the biology community. They were talking about, you know, are there 7 races? Are there, some of them would be really, really arbitrary, like there's 42 races. And they would have very minor deviations on what they would actually, you know, what would define them. And it was all kind of refuted by this particular biologist. I forget what his name was. But he said it doesn't matter if there's 3 races if there's 7 races or if there's 7,000 races. All we know is that we come from the specific region, in Africa, and all of humans' history. We have migrated and moved around, and those ecological and environmental factors in these different environments is what produced all of this variation in humanity today. And so we have not had any significant deviation from each other in any meaningful way. And so this concept is bunk. And I mean, this is paraphrasing basically, but this is as far as race ever got, as far as science went, right? But this kind of rhetoric, these people are subhuman, or there's some kind of fundamental difference in the behavior and psychology between races that isn't chopped up to competing social forces and environments and different locations. It's an inherent thing. There's inherent traits. This kind of thing stays around today, and it influenced the biggest totalitarian far-right regimes of the time. And it continues to do so.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at as late as the late 1800s in America, Irish people were not considered white. They were considered an inferior race. Germans were not considered white. They were an inferior race. Eastern Europeans, forget it. Italians, Spanish, they were not considered white people at all. To be white meant you were white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, period. And it wasn't until that this idea of expanding the white category really took root.
And why, right? It's because of the material forces on the ground, right? Who's fighting who now? Who needs the soldier?
Yeah, they needed more white people because America had to incorporate, a greater number of whites to be a white supremacist state. And, I remember back in the 60s, I was with a couple of Italian guys in New York, and they were going on about molignons, which is a derogatory term for black people. I said, hey, you guys only became white last week. Don't give me any shit. You were discriminated against, and even as when you were children in the 50s. And they had to admit that was true, and they still weren't considering Spanish people white, and race is a made up concept. There's nothing scientific about it at all. It's who's on the in crowd and who's in the out crowd. The Romans had no concept of race. If you were a Roman citizen, it didn't matter whether you were born in Gaul or England or wherever, you had citizenship status. If you didn't have citizenship status, you were a nobody, and you could be made a slave.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but, I think we have to acknowledge, that, this has done great harm to people, but it is based on bullshit. There's no such thing as inferior or superior genes on a mass level. And even within individuals, the difference between a genius and an idiot is only a few IQ points. The average person's IQ is 100, and what's a genius? 130, 140? It's not that much different.
To be fair, the IQ test, it's bad methodology. It's a really bad methodology. It's meant for children, the test. And if you take it multiple times and you understand how that test actually functions, you can repeatedly score higher and higher on it, to the point to where you can end up scoring in the 200s, which is like if this test had validity, you would be smarter than Einstein, and we don't have, hundreds of Einsteins walking around. I just think that's I get what you're trying to say. I'm just saying. I get what you mean. All right. Well, we're gonna have to close out for the day. All right. So all power to the people. The next class is on Saturday at 3 p.m. Central Time. Sorry, I think it's 2 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And I look forward to seeing you all at that class. That class will be taught by me. It's the Sanshakul Political Education class, our standard UPM material. This is the Marxism reading group, where we read literature from across the different history. All right, so all power to the people.
All right, Panther, love y'all.
Thank you all for joining us today. That was that was the New African Black Panther Party's class on Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. As Chairman Jake just said, we will be back on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the Hassan Shakur Education Program. We are in week 4 of 8. We will be broadcasting that as well. You can catch our current event stream on Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we will be having some other segments and shows headed your way soon. Bear with us. Once again, thank you for joining. All power to the people.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents. Just don't worry about it. Learn how to use what